Hey guys, welcome to HBCU Drumline Talk. My name is Ricardo Reese, and I'm joined by my great friend, my brother in percussion, Elijah Powell, also known as EP the Great. And we're coming at you today with a little something different. We kind of just came off of episode 16 of HBCU Drumline Talk, where we talked about the home team. And tonight we have a special guest with us. His name is James Swiger, and he's also from the Virginia area. He's from the other school down the way, Norfolk State University, also a member of Million Dollar Funk Squad as well. And tonight we're going to do something special. We're going to actually talk about tuning. And when we say tuning, we're talking specifically about multi-tenor tuning. And when we say multi-tenor tuning, we're talking about the quads, which is on its way out, much like the tries at this point, the quints and the septims at this time. So we're going to turn it over to Mr. Swiger. He's going to take on over. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll take it from there, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me out.
Yeah, no problem.
For everyone out there, my name is James Swiger. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. I think I'll go first in my background, just how my marching career has kind of gone. So I started in the fall of 2013 at Highland Springs High School. Actually, if we backtrack a little, I did spring camp of that year, and I played bass drum. And when I was at spring camp, I was kind of looking around at different drums, just trying to figure out, where my head was at. I knew nothing about marching band at the time. So, I was trying to figure out, what might I want to play? I was looking at quads, and it had the most drums, right? I'm kind of a competitive person. So, it just felt like, if I have the most drums and the heaviest drums, from a competitive standpoint, I was like, I'm going to be sweet. So I asked the percussion instructor, and that's Aaron Armwood. He taught me all 4 years of my high school tenure if I could play him, and he was open to the idea. In the fall, the person who taught me quads, his name was Dwayne. He was a senior, and I was a freshman, so it was a perfect opportunity for the continuity of the tenor line. I would get 1 year of experience with someone to teach me, and then I had 3 more years after that. So that ended up being my path through high school. I marched all 4 years on quads there. Then in 2017, I made my way to Norfolk State University, where I now march for the Spartan Legion and the Million Dollar Funk Squad. Obviously, that's been an incredible experience for myself, just as far as being part of, a lot of like-minded advanced percussionists and just getting to do some really amazing performances like Queen City and the A&T Battle of the Bands from 2019, lots of cool stuff there. And I also marched with the Spartans in DCI in 2018. And that was a really great experience too. So all in all, and I'm still have a few seasons left. There's a possible, I'm possibly marching this summer for Drum Corps. That's kind of on standby. But for anyone who wants to follow me on social media or whatever, you'll definitely see within the next month or so if I make that happen. And I'm probably going to do 1 more year of the Funk Squad as well. And then I'm hoping to do my age out for WGI as well, WGI percussion. And I have a few groups at the East Coast I'm looking at for that. So all in all, about nine years of playing quads. So pretty long experience with that.
So to go back, you said you never played drums before you got to high school, right?
I played drum set kind of. High school's when I got really serious about drums. Drums was kind of a hobby. I say I started drums when I was 8 years old. It actually started with Rock Band, that old game for the PlayStation. My parents got it in Christmas of 2007. So that's kind of my anniversary of playing drums, if you will. And I enjoyed it so much that I was playing it every day. And, even though Rock Band isn't necessarily real drums, you learn kind of coordination when you're playing the game. So, when they would take me to music stores, I didn't necessarily sound like a beginner all the way on a drum set. I kind of understood how to keep, basic time and stuff. But I grew up in an apartment, and we didn't have room for, a serious drum set to be in the house. There was noise complaint laws and just, cost of that. So high school was really the beginning of my serious drum experience, touching real drums every day.
So would you say your skills was I guess, okay for high school when you got there, or you still had to develop, I guess the skill level?
I'd say I wasn't like a complete like beginner to the instrument. I picked up certain things. I think I remember like I was playing certain rudiments like without knowing what they were. Like I remember like way back, like I figured out flam taps without knowing they were flam taps. It was just something that I kind of dabbled around with, and then you get to high school, and I actually learned what they were called, and I learned how to kind of properly make them, how to make them sound good, and the applications. So I think like the thing I've always stood by with myself is mentally, I've always been way ahead of the curve drumming wise in my head than with my hands. Like I feel like a lot of stuff came easy to me, like as far as understanding it, but I had to work very hard to get like my chops. Like a lot of people will tell me like, "Oh man, you have all these amazing chops." And for me, I don't really feel that way because like even like a double stroke roll, like it took me years to get that like really solid. From when I was 8 years old to like probably around sophomore year of high school was when I was actually playing like really good rolls. So it took me a long time to develop the physical chops.
Well, yeah, basically what I'm getting at, because MD, Million Dollar Funk Squad, it's not an easy line to make. And for you to, I guess, starting out in high school, as far as I guess taking instruction, like you said, it takes mental more than I guess the being able to play, but you also gotta have the mental to want to get better, to make it to that next goal. But it's basically what I was getting at with those questions. You made it happen for you to make, MD. I guess starting in high school is your first time being in a drum line, I would say.
Right. Yeah. No. Like on like the account of like the move to MD, like I was just raised in that culture, and I just bought in like 110%. Like there's a Highland Springs has like a huge alumni base who went to Norfolk,
Yeah.
and then they would come back like and just help out. And so because I was buying into the culture, even if they were playing like, MD material or whatever, I was always watching them. I would stay after practice like 30 minutes to an hour sometimes when they were just playing around, and they'd play little sprees or be like, and I'd be like, oh, what's that? And they'd teach me. Or you mean like, how do you get this better? And they teach me that. And, I can remember like kind of over the years, I know one guy a lot was Antoine Hopkins, who marched Highland Springs from like '08 to 13, and an MD from like 13 to 16. He came back like every spring to spring camp, and he would always play like the latest MD material, and I would try and kind of learn it, and so I think that's kind of how I got ready for the move from like only having 4 years of serious drum experience to that level of drumline. It's just because I just bought into it so much, and I was just always around those people.
Yeah, that's always a plus when the old heads come back, to help and do stuff, and you just pick up, what you see or hear. Good stuff.
EP, we've heard this many times before, the importance of the buy-in with every type of line that we've talked to and instructors and everything. That's so crucial, just to have the buy-in of your students and the line itself, even whether it's on high school. And like you said, just to piggyback, the importance of having people come back and give back. Having people come back and say, hey, look, you're interested. This is what we do here. Come on down. Check it out.
Yeah.
So good introduction, James. And so now let's go ahead and talk about the tuning. And let's start at quads first. And notice when I said in the beginning, quads is phasing their way out now, because really we don't see those anymore. Quads obviously is the 4 drums, much like the tri-toms back in the day where there was 3 drums. And they're gone. They're gone now. So I think the quads are on their way out at this point. And let's start with tuning. I'll let you take over. Probably want to talk about the choice of heads that you would recommend just as for tuning quads.
Yeah. So tuning quads can be a very loaded subject. I think the best way to simplify it is to just kind of separate the components, and then there's obviously the practical experience. But when I think of like quad tuning, I think it's first. I think the first thing you should do is set the angle. Like, kind of do some research, watch different lines. What sounds good to you, and what do you think will fit within the context of your line. Not every. I think quad tuning is probably the most versatile of the like different battery sections, at least in my opinion. I might be biased on that, just being a quad player for so long, but like I feel like snare tuning tends to fall into either like high tabletop Kevlar, or you got kind of the more traditional like rope drum or Mylar sound. And then bass drums, you kind of got like a set of ranges, but quads kind of, I feel like they can kind of fall anywhere within that range. So I think it's important to do your research and figure out what sound you want first. So for me in high school, starting off, so like I said, I was line leader by my sophomore year. Mr. Armwood was he was very like hands-on and like kind of letting us figure out stuff by like trial and error type of teaching. So I actually started tenor tuning on my own as early as that. And I remember the first thing I tried to do was imitate old Highland Springs sounds, because I figured, okay, well, I'm at Highland Springs High School. Let me try and, navigate tuning to sound like the old drum lines. So that leads to the first concept of tenor tuning, which is the pitch of the drums. When it comes to like the pitch of the drums, the most important thing, I think, is that you're not picking a range that's too high or too low for your drum line and for the type of heads you're using and for the size of drums. So when it comes to the size of drums, first you have kind of the smaller, the high school set, which is 8, 10, 12, and 13. And then you have the full-size quads, which are 10, 12, 13, and 14. Right off the bat, if you're trying to make like a set of 8, 10, 12, 13 sound like a 10, 12, 13, 14, it's not going to work, because each size of drum is going to have its own like sweet spot, that characteristic of sound where you're going to get like a nice amount of resonance off of the drum, but it's still articulate. If you're trying to crank if you're trying to make a 13-inch drum 4 sound like a 14-inch, it's probably, if you try to make it sound like that, it's going to be too low and it's going to be very twingy. But if you take it up too high, like a drum 3 on a full size, you're going to make that drum 1, that 8-inch, sound more like a Spock than a drum 1. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, in general, I think the first thing to do is to just mess around with tuning the drums, just trying out different pitches, listening to other lines. I would try to match their pitches first, and then play on the drums for a while and see if, the drums sound resonant, but they still attack, Like I said, I start with drum 4. I start with the lowest drum, because it's very easy to overtune that low drum and make it too choked off. And I think it's also very easy for it to be too twingy. So basically, I'll tune it up. Now I usually tune it to a B. So I know I'm kind of diverging now, but I use like a tuning app on my phone that I can pull up really quick. I use this app called InstaTuner. INS Tuner. InstaTuner. And I don't know if you can really see it on here, but there's kind of this like wheel here. And so if I select a B here, I can play it, right? And what I'll do is I'll have like either my AirPods in now, or I used to put the phone up to my ear, and I'll try to equate that drum to that pitch. And what I've developed over the years is I've developed a set of pitches that allow me to always like get the tuning I want. Like at Norfolk, I tune to B, D, E, and G for the 4 main drums, right? Yeah. So for the smaller set of drums, you're gonna want to probably tune them a little higher. They're smaller drums. They're gonna need a little bit more tension. The kind of. Sorry, I'm like freezing up real. This is a very loaded subject. So yeah,
take your time.
Yeah, sorry. Podcasting is new to me, so I'm a little ahead of myself in my head. You were talking about head choices, right?
So basically, to dial it back on in, yeah. So in regards to quads, right? So I think we want to start there before we move up to the quints and then the septups. do you have a specific, you already mentioned you tune to pitches, right? You specifically tune to pitches, right? Do you feel that because quads are on their way out, there are still some schools that are out there that still use them. Is there a particular head choice that you would recommend, or kind of say, hey, look, these are based on your drumming, your style of drum line, probably want to look at these heads. And I know there are a lot of quad heads out there or just multi-tenor heads out there. What do you think works best?
Yeah, so for me, the gold standard head has always been the Remo pinstripe. That head has never failed me in all of the years I've used, but that's for a more like contemporary style of drumline, I think,
Right.
with a little bit of higher tuning. If you listen to like the Norfolk block from 2019, our drums are like cranked up most of the way. They're not like kind of like West Coast, like old school, like Blue Devils, like all the way up where they sound kind of like tin cans, but you know they're pretty cranked. They still hold a lot of resonance, and the best thing about them for me is they have a lot of durability. The heads are going to last for a long time. If you want a little bit of a warmer sound, I would look into a coated head. So I know in high school we played Evans. I think we used the Evans Black Maxes, if I'm not mistaken. I think they were. And we also used when we still played Remo the Black Suedes. I remember with the Black Suedes, like it had a very warm tone. So if you're looking for like lower tunings or kind of like a warmer sound, I would look at coated heads. I've also used the Remo whiteheads before. I can't remember what they're called. I think they're like Emperors. But that's going to give you like a pretty like middle ground type of sound.
Okay.
There's also the Evans clear heads. I think that's like if you're looking for like an Evans equivalent of the Remo pinstripe, look into like the Evans clear heads.
So would I guess would that play a part in the material? I'm speaking on in general. I guess if with the choice of heads and the tuning, would that play a part in the material that the school is playing, or wouldn't matter?
No, I definitely think like from a stylistic standpoint, like at Norfolk, we play like a lot of like things with like Afro-Cuban rhythms in it and kind of like, especially like Latin influence. There's a cadence of ours called Calypso Groove. You know, it kind of has that blah, blah, da, and sometimes we'll do like these like 6-stroke rolls, kind of like timbali style on the 2 drum. For us, that is like definitely essential. You know, we want to make sure that drum 2 is in that sweet spot. And we want to make sure that the rim shots are really like projecting all the way to the audience. I think in that case, I've had better experiences with the pinstripes versus like warmer heads, because I think the rim shots tend to pierce through the sound more. And for you know, obviously like drum corps style material, you know, if you're playing like a lot of dense notes, you're probably going to want to use like a higher tuning just for the articulation, because you're going to tend to play like lots of rolls and stuff. If you want those to kind of like balance and blend with the snare line, it really also kind of depends on your snare and bass tuning too. Like I tend to think of tenors as the middle voice. You know, that's why I think they should be. Like your snares are kind of your alto voice, your tenors are here, and your bass drums are here, right? It's kind of this like 3-way staircase. If you're cranking your tenors too much, it's going to be up here with like the snares to where you're not going to hear like the 2 sounds separately as much anymore. That's a lesson I kind of learned in my junior year of Highland Springs. I got really into Blue Devils style of tuning in that time. And when I look back at those footage, like sometimes the blend between the snares and the tenors, it's hard to really kind of like analyze what's going on because the sounds are meshing with each other. But then if you have it too low, then you mesh with the tonals and the bass drums, you know? So I think it's the most important thing is just making sure that you're in that middle voice. Tenors should be the middle voice. They should kind of be the counterpoint to the section, you know? Like your snares tend, like in a basic like type of groove thing, they're going to hold down 2s and 4s. Your bass drums are, you know, providing whatever bass line. As the tenor in the middle voice, we tend to kind of complement these accents. You know, whether it's like if it's a band song, you know, we might complement things in the horns. You know what I'm saying? So like the way I think about it is if like in a band, like if you have like, I think Mr. B has talked about this analogy before here, Mr. Bethea, on this podcast too. He thinks of drumline as like kind of its own band. Like the cymbals are kind of the woodwinds, and the snares are like the trumpets, like the high brass, and then bass drums are like the tubas and the trombones. Tenors are kind of like the mellows, the euphoniums, the baritones. You know what I'm saying? It's that horn sound. So as far as just my like tuning approach, I try to think of that range. You know, I don't think, you know, unless your material is dictating like very heavily within a style, like, and you need to tune for that, I think you can kind of get away with a general sense of tuning. But if like what style you're playing is strong enough in like a certain like realm, then I would probably match your tuning to that.
Okay. So I'm in high school, 9th grade. You teaching me how to put on a corn head, fresh out the box. I got a drum key, I got a drum the head, and I have the quints or quads, whatever. What do I do?
Okay, yeah. So, very first thing you're gonna want to do with any drum head is make sure that it's nice and prepped and it's going to be ready to be seated. So I actually have a drum head in my closet, if you don't mind me getting it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that might be a good example. I can kind of interact with the show. All right, cool. So this is one of the tricks I learned very early on. What you'll want to do is take your drum head and you'll want to put your thumbs here on this kind of like ridge right here where it meets the metal hoop. And you want to just push both thumbs in like this. And you hear that crackle sound. What you want to do is go around the head and just do that all the way around, like about 3 or 4 times. And what that does is there's usually like a layer of glue in here. If you've ever put on a head and you haven't done this and you hear the head like cracking a lot, like you think something's about to break, that's what that sound is. So what this does is it allows you to do it preemptively, and it allows the head to seat more evenly. Because if the glue is kind of popping over time, then, you know, suddenly this part of the head might get looser suddenly. You know, you tune it, you hear a crack, suddenly the pitch of this part of the head has gone down a lot. So by doing this ahead of time, you kind of just take care of the problem beforehand, right? So that would be the first thing I do. Secondly, when you place the drum head onto the drum, you want to make sure that it's seated evenly around the bearing edge. So what the bearing edge is it's that kind of like weird strip of wood. It's kind of shaped like this, like it kind of comes to a point and has that curve there. That is the only point, that tiny point, where the drum actually makes contact with the head within regards to like the playing surface, right? Even before that, I would actually give your, if you have like paper towels or like fiber cloths like you would use to like clean a car, I would actually give your bearing edges a wipe anytime you change a head, just to make sure it's clear. And some people will go as far as even if you have like wooden bearing edges. At Norfolk now with the System Blue drums, we actually have like metal bearing edges, which is interesting. But wood bearing edges tend to chip a little bit, especially if you hit like a rim shot really close to the head and your stick kind of dents on it, you can get little cracks. So you can get like a block of like wax from like a store and just like rub it around the head a few times, and that fills in the gaps on your bearing edge. So that way you have a more solid surface, and it kind of lubricates it a bit too, so the head, you know, just sits nice on it. And the thing is if you don't do these things, the contact point of the bearing edge to the head is like the most important thing when it comes to like the quality of your drum and tuning. Because if you have like one imperfection in your bearing edge, that's gonna unevenly distribute tension within that part of the head. And tenors, that's already a bane. You know, with tenors you have playing zones, right? So we're already playing in one specific area of the head that, you know, could be on the corner. So it's not like a snare drum or a bass drum where we're playing in the center. You know, we kind of evenly distribute that. We're kind of doing all of our damage to like one small part of the head. So it's already harder to keep the heads in tune, especially within that realm. But if you have like a bad part of your bearing edge, then, that's just another problem on top of that you have to deal with. So then after you've set your bearing edge, you'll want to set the head on. What I usually like to do, and I don't have a drum to demonstrate this with, but I usually like to push on the center of the head. So imagine this is on the bearing edge. I'll usually kind of do this a few times just to make sure that the head is nice and stretched out and that it's sitting properly on the bearing edge, because you want it to be centered. It's pretty easy to, like, when you put the rim on, if you tighten your lugs too fast, for the head to be too far over in one direction. And what will happen is when you crank the drum up, you'll notice it'll start to warp the rim. You could tell if your rim's warped if you see, like, this metal part of the head. When you tighten up your hoops, you'll be able to see, like, some of this, like, part of the head here. And ideally, if your rims aren't warped, you're only going to see, the clear part of the head or the coated part of the head, right? After that, you would want to set the rim on the drum. If you have, like, the resources to do it, I would clean your lugs would be the next thing, or, like, lubricate them. So things I've used over the years, I used to use, like, Vaseline, I think. That was one thing I used in the past. Now I use, can't even think of what it's called. It's a spray.
WD-40?
No, it's not WD-40. It's, man, I haven't gotten it in a while. This is what happens when you haven't touched a drum since, like, 2019. Well, I mean, I guess I had last fall, but I wasn't doing, like, an extensive tuning process. It's been a while. But, yeah, there's, like, gosh, I wish I knew the name of it offhand, but it's like a spray bottle, and you can attach, like, a little red hose in it, and I'll go into the lug casing, and I'll spray it in there, and I'll also take the lugs, like, outdoors or whatever, and I'll just give them a spray down. And by lubricating your lugs, you're preventing anything from getting stuck when you're tuning. I don't know what y'all's experience are with tuning tenors, but have you ever tried to crank a lug and then it just stops? Like, it just refuses to turn?
Yeah.
Sometimes, right. Sometimes that can be due to, like, a blockage in there, or you might have a stripped lug. That's something else to look for. I would check all of your lugs and make sure that the threads are even. And sometimes you'll strip the actual casing. I know at Norfolk one time I had to replace the actual lug casing. I know it was like my last game of 2017. We had like 30 minutes before we had to march out, and one of my lug casings on one of my Spocks broke. So I had to run, like, to the other end of the music department and, like, steal a lug casing off one of the old drums and swap it out, put the lug in, and then tune my head up, all within, like, 20 minutes to be set up to march down the street. That was a pretty intimidating experience because, obviously I didn't want to miss the game or anything.
So I want to cut you off, but to go back, would that be the cause of not lubricating it correctly in the beginning, or just wear and tear?
It can be both. I think lubrication is a good, like, obviously it helps with, the higher tensions, like, it makes it easier to turn. But I think it's a good preventative towards, like, wear and tear. Like, if it turns easier, it's not going to grind against each other as much, Ideally, what the lubrication is, it's a barrier. It's kind of like a washer, when you tightens up and up, you don't want it touching that surface. The washer is kind of that preventative barrier. So that's what the lubrication is, and it has the side effect of, just making it easier to turn. I think also, like, if you just don't take care of it, like, you can get, like, dust and dirt and grime in there, or even stick tape, That's why I think, every time you do a head change, clean your drums. That's why I said, like, clean your bearing edge, clean your rim, clean your lugs. Like, if obviously, like, it's a very time-consuming process, but if you're in a situation of, like, most high schools I know where those drums got to last a long time, you're not getting new drums every, 4 or 5 years, or, whatever the case, you got to go the extra mile to make sure that your tenors sound good years down the line. That's at least my opinion.
Yeah, and go ahead, EP.
Sorry?
No, I'm go ahead, Rick.
So that could be, you brought up some very good points there. One, for our potential instructors out there or our band directors out there who's looking for someone to come in and tech, just make sure you prep that head. Prep all heads, especially when dealing with the quads and everything. It's a lot of maintenance when we have to deal with those particular drums as well. So it's not just, putting the drum head on, you crank it up. There's a lot of attention to detail that's required when doing that. So good points, James. Thank you.
Right. I remember the name now. It's white lithium grease. That's what it is. White lithium grease. You can find it at like Lowe's or Home Depot or any like hardware store. That's what I used at Norfolk. I got that from when I marched Spartans in 2018. We had like several cans of them on the truck, and we would help the quad tech change the heads, and he would spray that. So that's where I learned about that. I think it's a little less messy. Like Vaseline can just kind of get everywhere. You know, it can get all over your hands, and then you got like the dirt and the oil on your hands from that. I think just having the straw and just the viscosity of the liquid is just a lot simpler to use that. So yeah. From there, once you, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you good.
Okay.
You good.
Okay, yeah. So once you put the rim on, next obviously you're going to put the lugs in. Finger tightening is the next step, and this is a step that you got to be really careful with, and be disciplined with, because this will set you up for success or set you up for failure when you're trying to crank the head down the line. I would start, just rotating the lug and trying to get it as far down as your finger strength allows you to. The tension of the lug is going to stop itself, when you're no longer strong enough to turn it. That's kind of like a consistent reference frame for the tightness of the lug. You know what I'm saying? So I would go around each lug, and I start with opposites. So like the bigger drums, like if you're playing on full-size tenor, 14, 13, and 12, all have 8 lugs usually, right? So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A plus and a cross, right? What I do is I usually tighten them in pairs, right? And then I'll kind of go around. I'll do the other part. I'll do the next one. And I'll do the next one. And then I'll just go around and check it and just make sure that, I've gotten them as tight as possible with my fingers. After that, I check to see if, so you have your rim, right? The lug is kind of going down into it. And on the lug, like you have the part that goes in the drum key, the little square part. You have that little lip on the lug, right? I check and see if that's touching the bearing edge. Because sometimes, depending on like the age of your drums or just if things are starting to strip, you'll finger tighten it, but it won't touch the rim yet. So if it's not touching the rim, but like the rest are, I'll use the drum key and I'll just like tighten it just so that way it touches the rim. Because then it's kind of at like that equal point of like pressure on the head, From there, I usually give the head another, like, I'll put like my fist sometimes on it and I'll push down into the head just to make sure for the final time that it's seated properly on the bearing edge and that, it's not pulling within one way or another. And if I find that the head is stuck in a position where it's not centered, then it's probably best to loosen the lugs and reseat the head and try again. Because, like I said, if the head's not seated, then you're going to have no chance at making the head be in tune with itself later down the line. So once you've gotten everything finger tightened, I usually will take you'll want a high tension drum key, by the way. I prefer to use the T keys. They're kind of shaped like this. They're usually like a couple inches long. You can find them at music stores or online. I used to use the one that Vic Firth uses or sells, and I've used like a Pearl key for a couple years. But I mean, any high tension drum key. There's even like a Gibraltar one that's like a ratchet that I've used sometimes. And that one's kind of nice because you can like pull it, and instead of having to regrip your hand, you just, it's like a ratchet and socket set. You can just keep tightening it. But I prefer to use the T key only because I can keep track of the rotations a little better. Because with the two handles, I can tell if I've made like a 180-degree turn pretty easily, So I just prefer to use it for that reason. I'll usually give the head about like 3 180-degree turns on each side, and then I'll just leave it overnight. So I should clarify, I usually try to do head changes like after a rehearsal where I have a day to let the heads sit overnight. That's ideal, because if there are any pressure issues, like it's too tight on one part of the head or too loose, it's going to sort itself out a little bit more overnight. It's going to have a lot of time to figure it out versus you trying to force everything to, be at the same tension right from the get-go. Any imperfections are going to kind of show themselves by the next day, right?
Yep.
So then, next thing to do after you've come back the next day would be to get the head in tune with itself. I have a practice pad here just for the sake of like demonstration, what you'll want to do is, so imagine this is a drum head. This is my little personal practice pad. You know, everyone's got their stickered practice pad or whatever. This is actually a slim pad that I spray painted black. So, but you'll want to tap on the edge of the drum just like this, with not much force, like a 3-inch tap or whatever. And you'll want to do it right by where the lug is. So, you know, if you have like your lugs at like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you'll want to tap at those 8 points. So 1, 2, 3, and I'll go around the circle. My goal is to find the highest pitch. And, you know, it might be tied with like 1 or 2 others, but the goal is to find the lug that is tuned to the highest. And then from there, you want to bring all the other lugs up to that pitch. So just a little kind of aside, what this is we're making sure that every lug is tuned the same within the head. Like, you can, because tenors, we play on the edge of the drum, there can kind of be a misleading sound where if you play at like one part of the head, you'll think you've achieved a certain pitch on the head. But if the head's out of tune with itself, you're going to have some lugs over here that are at a completely different pitch. And that just doesn't allow you to like maximize the resonance you're going to get off the drum. It's kind of related to like if anyone, like for college students who have taken like physics of music, or for anyone who's taken like a physics class in high school, or even just like anyone interested in music, you know, sound is all waves, right? And, you know, the pitch that we hear is just determined by the frequency of those waves. If we have like different parts of the head at different waves, these waves clash. Instead of like being in like the same motion, they clash and they limit the resonance of your head. And oftentimes it can lead to a lot of nasty overtones coming from the head. You know, a lot of drum set players will actually intentionally do this, like on their snare. They'll detune one lug to get overtones. But on tenors, that tends to be an undesirable sound, at least in my opinion. So when you found the highest lugs, what you'll want to do is you'll want to go around again. And let's say these 3 lugs are all the highest and they're tuned. Let me actually use the head. So these 3 lugs are tuned, but this one is lower. What you'll want to do is you want to match this one to this one, right? So you're going to take the drum key and you're going to tune this lug up. But you're also going to tune up the lug on the opposite side of the head. And that's something I learned like way down the line. I didn't realize that you were supposed to do this. But what ends up happening is when you tune this lug up, you're going to want to tune the one opposite so it stretches the head evenly. And often what will happen is when you often have like a culprit lug that's lower than like some of the other ones, it tends that the opposite one will be lower as well. So you kind of take care of the problem in one go. So let's say these 3 are good. This one's low. We take this one up and we take this one up. If this one's low, even if this one is already good, we'll still want to take this one and this one up a little bit because you want to pull on the head evenly within that direction, right? And you have to keep going around and doing this until all of your lugs are at the same tension and at the same pitch. And if you've done this correctly, you should notice that the drum will sing for longer and it'll sing stronger with the fundamental pitch of the drum. So when you play like a multi-tenor drum, you're kind of hearing 2 sounds coming off of it. What most people tend to hear most prominently is the fundamental tone of the drum. And this is like, if you were to sing the drums as a melody, that's the tone you're thinking of, the fundamental tone. A small percentage of people that I've known actually hear the overtone more prominently, even if like if I tune like drum 4 to a B, there are some people who would hear it as like an F sharp, interestingly. And I'm not exactly sure what causes that, but both frequencies do exist within the sound, but generally most people are going to hear the fundamental tone. But as a general rule, you want to make sure that the fundamental tone of the drum is the sound you're getting, you know, across. Which makes me think of like when you're thinking about tuning too, just something else to consider. You really want to think about tuning for what your audience hears and not for what you hear. You know, I think everyone would love for the drums to sound like great and perfect beneath them the way that they would want to hear. But the reality of it is what may sound good to you may not sound good to the person all the way, like if you're performing in a gym, all the way in the back. You know, if you take your tenors up way too much, it might sound really cool to you, but the person in the back of the room probably doesn't hear it. especially if you're outdoors on like a football field and you have like a whole like 200-piece band in front of you or whatever size band, you know, the tenors aren't going to cut through as much. So I think it's important, if you have the ability to do so, is when you're tuning tenors or any drum, is to have another person stand at a distance that you trust their ear and play the drums and have them give feedback. Is it cutting through the ensemble? You know, like at Norfolk, we'll get that comment a lot, like with like tuning, once we're kind of figuring out like the size of the line and the size of the band. Like sometimes Mr. Bethea will say, hey, snares, we're not cutting through, you know, the band right now. Even if they're, you know, playing with like caveman level force, sometimes certain tuning ranges just don't cut through the band, right? So just something else to keep in mind with tuning is just think about how your audience hears that. That was definitely something I had to learn, like more strongly going to Norfolk. I think at Highland Springs, I tuned a lot for like myself. I noticed in some of my later years, it's a little harder to hear the tenors through the band. And so at Norfolk, I took like a lot more careful consideration to make sure that what we're playing is, you know, heard within the mix. You know what I'm saying? Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, once you've got the head in tune with itself, you'll want to do this with all your drum heads, whether you have a set of quads. Same principles apply. I really don't think of quads, quints, and sextuplets as being too separate, because the quad, like, the reason that people kind of refer to the instrument, in my opinion, is like quads more often than not, is because the four main drums are always constant no matter what setup you have. Whether you have no spock or two spocks or one spock, you know, the four main drums are kind of the main sound of the instrument. I always think of the spock as being like an accent drum. You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of I don't want to say a separate sound, but it's kind of a separate sound in the sense that like the spock sounds dramatically different from the other heads. Yeah.
So James, just for our viewers out there, when we say spot, understand that when we talk about the quads, like you said, it's the four main drums. You have the top drum, then you have the four. The spot would go right in the middle of the four drums, making it a quint, or you add two spocks, making it the septuplets. So the spock is that really small drum. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. Nope, perfect. And there's other names for it too. Like I've heard Spock, I've heard Gok, I've heard shot drum. If you go out to the West Coast, if you have like the 6 and the 8 Spock, they'll call it the spike and the spook. This instrument is kind of interesting to me because there's not really like a snare drum. It's simple. It's one drum. It's a snare, or a bass drum. It's just a bass drum. But you know, you got quads, quints, tenors, sextuplets, you know, spikes, spooks, spocks. It's like 10,000 different names for this instrument. So. But yeah, that's a really good thing to point out. So, yeah, once you've gotten all your heads in tune with each other, though, that's when I would go back earlier to what I was saying about you want to find your end goal. You know, where in the range do you want your tenors to set? Once you have your drum in tune with itself, it's just the game of bringing it up to that pitch, like slowly, while making sure that it stays in tune with itself. So let's say I know where I want my drum four to end up. You know, I was using the tuner app earlier at Norfolk for the 4 drum. We use a B, right? So let's say it's not at like a B natural yet. It's like a couple notes slower or whatever. I'll want to start, you know, bringing the drum up. It's important to do this within what we call the star pattern, by the way, which is kind of the same thing we were talking earlier about, like the cross and the other, and like the X cross. We want to make sure that when we bring the head up, we like start with one lug, we do the opposite, and then that lug and the opposite, and that lug and the opposite, and that lug and the opposite. If you go around in a circle, and you're doing too big of like a turn, you can kind of, I've seen people go around the drums in like just a circle. If they're doing like a very small turn, then that tends to be fine. But if you do like a huge turn, what will happen is one side of the head is going to have a lot of pressure for like a very short amount of time. And even though it might only be a few seconds while you go around the head, that can cause the head to unseat itself just within that time. So I think it's just best practice if you're doing more than like an eighth of a turn or like a quarter of a turn to just make sure you're doing all the lugs in opposite pairs. And the same thing applies for like the 1 drum, like where it will have 6 lugs. You want to do 1, 2, and 3. And then if you have an 8-inch Spock, that one's weird because you have 5, so you don't actually have any pairs. I kind of do the like elementary school star for that. You know, the teachers kind of used to write, if you did a good job on your paper, they would do that star with like one line, they wouldn't let go, and it has that little like shape in the middle. I kind of do that same like cross pattern on the low Spock. And then for like your high Spock, or like if you have a 6-inch Spock, just that, you can. Sorry.
No, you good.
I thought I heard something. Okay, yeah. Sorry, my AirPods are crazy, but yeah, I would just do like the 2 pairs like that as well. But going back to like the 4 drum, if we want to bring it up to a B, I would bring it up a little at a time, go around the head again, check if like any of the lugs are out of tune. Again, if they do go out of tune, find the highest one and match the others to that. One kind of overlooked concept with tenor drum tuning is like, it's really only good practice to bring the head up in pitch. If you need to bring a head down in pitch, it's important that you loosen it to lower than where your target is, and then you bring it back up. I believe the best explanation that's been given to me about that is if you loosen the lugs, it kind of incentivizes the lugs to want to loosen more. Whereas if you tighten it, it kind of has a firmer grip on the head. So if you just loosen down to a pitch, your head is going to drop really fast, and it just allows like a lot more possibilities for like one lug to fall out of tune and for uneven pressure to come across the head. So if you need to lower the pitch of a head ever, just make sure you bring it below and then you bring it back up, like very small turns to that pitch, right? And then from there, you know, obviously you can, whatever your targets are for whatever drums, you just want to bring them up to that pitch and just make sure that each drum is in tune. In terms of that, what your end goals are, some things to keep in mind. Obviously, I said one of the ways I learned was through trial and error and looking at groups that I looked up to and trying to like match their tuning schemes and seeing if I like that. Another thing you can try is if you have like a good musical ear and you can like tell notes apart and like what they are, or like the distances between the notes, like intervals. One thing you might want to consider is like the intervals between drums. So if I'm not mistaken offhand, I want to say a lot of people will do like a major third from drum 4 to drum 3, and then a minor third from drum 3 to drum 2, and then a major third again from drum 2 to drum 1. Those might not be it offhand, what a lot of people use, but it's something like that. Usually a lot of tenor drum tuning is going to be in major thirds and minor thirds, whatever you want to go with. It just kind of correlates with the 1-inch difference size in the head. Like the 14 to 13, that 1-inch difference, the sweet spots tend to kind of rise and fall within that like major third characteristic. I believe it's major third. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, so I want to and you mentioned something that I'm glad you did. I was hoping you did with the hand tuning. Well, I'm sorry, hand tightening of the lugs before you even grab the wrench. You know, when you first putting the lugs on, you want the hand tune first with your fingers. Not just, how the lugs throw it in, grab the wrench, you just cranking away. You want to use your fingers, to get that, get it on first. But, quick question. So, say it's whatever school, day of the performance, and the heads just came in this morning. We getting off the bus. We got a performance. What do I do? Is it the same process? Well, of course it's not, but we got to be fast,
Yeah. So if it's like an emergency situation, it's actually a good thing to bring up. I think the best thing you can do is like anticipate the situation. Like if you know the heads aren't going to come into the morning of a performance or whatever, have the end goal in mind for whatever you're going to do with your tuning. Don't be questioning, the relationships between the drums, like the intervals, or, just know what your tuning is and just stick to what you know. Because if you're going to have to do it like really fast, odds are you're not going to have a lot of time to be like, ooh, is that right? You just got to go and you got to tune, you know what I'm saying? My advice is if the heads like absolutely have to be broken in on like a show day, my advice is to just, don't take them up too high. The higher you take them, the more they'll fall. Your heads are going to fall in pitch, by the way. Like no matter what, if you don't have like a day or two to like let them sit, as they break in and stretch out under that pressure and under the pressure of you playing, they're going to fall over time. So I think the best thing you can do is take them up to the pitch that you want for the show, let them break in, and then like if it's like a high school band, like a competition day, right before they go on, set them right back to where they need to be, and they should last through a show. You know what I'm saying? I know at Norfolk, even with the heads being broken in, we always have a drum key with us. We always we take turns. Like one or two of us will have a drum key in the back pocket of the uniform. So if like a drum goes out like in the third quarter or whatever after halftime, we can kind of, pass the key down the line. They'll kind of tighten it up a little bit. So that way, because, one of the last things we do in the game is to tunnel going back into the band room. And that's one of the more popular things. Those videos tend to blow up. So we're like, okay, we know that the drums need to be in tune, and we just want them to be in tune as much as possible. So I would say if it's an emergency situation, just try to anticipate, what your end goal is. Be prepared to tune constantly throughout the day, and just try to do it relative to like the most important parts of your performance. If you got like a football game, I might do it like right before they, march out like into their stadium or whatever. And then you probably don't need to touch it when they're in the stands doing band songs, because the reality of it is, there's a lot of other frequencies and stuff that people aren't going to be bothered too much by like a drum being out of tune if you're playing like head buses or something, you know what I'm saying? But, when you get to like the field show, if you got like 5 minutes before you go on, you might want to fine tune things then. So.
James, you have brought up some fantastic points in this dialogue about tuning. And one thing I will say in the world of HBCU drumming, I'll use us, for example. Virginia State and Norfolk State has a different sound than Virginia Union, right? Virginia Union sounds different, tenors sound different than Virginia State's. Obviously, Virginia State sound different than Norfolk State's tenors. And then when you get into like the world of HBCU drum lines, just in general, the range of the sounds of each line differs. But I will say this: no matter what line you're on, the maintenance doesn't change. How you take care of the drum, how you take care of the heads, how you play. It doesn't matter where you're at. The one absolute constant is, that maintenance is very important. Whatever your line sounds like, whatever you want to sound, what works for you might not work for us over here or whatever, but that maintenance all across the board, I think that needs to be really ironed out or really dealt with at that point in regards to maintenance.
Right. So, yeah, definitely.
No, go ahead. You got it.
Okay. Yeah. Maintenance is all like, I kind of, I don't have like any official teaching gigs, but I kind of like quad tech at some places right now. I'm still in college. I teach at my old school, Highland Springs. I just spent like the last like week or two, like changing all the tom trims, the little plastic or like the wrap on the bottom of the drums that keeps the wood from touching the ground or whatever. And that took like a whole week to do. Yeah, the cycle of maintenance on drums just never ends, no matter where you are. You're always tightening things or loosening things or something breaks. Like when I marched Spartans in 2018, after like our last show the entire season, one of the quad players' J bars on the harness literally snapped in half. So if that had happened like a day before, we would have been, screwed, I think. Well, they probably would have had spare parts, but yeah, things always break. So.
Yeah, the J bar breaking, we had that happen at State, a couple of years ago before we got to the pearls, we have now. So you mentioned, a good thing, Rick, far as maintaining maintenance. But say a school, who don't have money to get those new drums, maybe 3 years later, 5 years later, but to quench or quads, what they want to say, the shell is warping from the rain, the snow, different weather. What do you do then?
Well, so there's a couple things that can warp. If your rims are warped, that's the easier one. Obviously, like if like money's an issue, I would look into maybe like it can last a while. Like the rims were warped a lot of my time at Highland Springs, and I think we still got like a pretty good quad sound. You just have to be prepared that like sometimes like that side where it's warped is gonna kind of sound a little, different than like the rest of the head. I know what that reminds me as well. When you do a head change on tenors, like I was saying, we have playing zones, right? We play on a very small, specific part of the head that tends to be closest to the edge. So we put up a lot of the pressure there. When you do a head change, you should rotate your rims. I usually rotate them by like one lug or sometimes like a quarter turn if I think it needs it, like if it's been on longer. By rotating your rims, what you kind of do is you'll warp them evenly over the rim so it doesn't like warp as much in the long term. They're going to warp because you're playing in that one area, but you'll stretch this part of the rim and then you rotate, then you stretch this part and next part. Suddenly it's all just kind of been stretched evenly and you still have a pretty good rim, right? So that's another thing. Interestingly, we can't do that anymore with the System Blue drums because they have the rim cutouts for the straight playing zones. We actually don't rotate the rims anymore, but I don't think any of them have warped yet. So as far as the shells, that is always a bummer when the drum shell warps. There's not much you can do on the hardware side of things. Like as far as like, it's pretty hard to like mess with the wood of the drum without potentially risking like damaging or destroying the drum even further. I'd say the best thing to do is just experiment with like what tuning options you might have, and like if you can find something that makes it like tolerable, like whatever drum is warped or whatever, like it still sounds like okay, I would just kind of stick with that sound. Sometimes you have to adjust to the needs of your equipment if you're in like a money situation or like a long-term like can't replace drums type of situation. A drum isn't going to sound the way, like if you have a 20-year-old set of quads, you can't expect it to sound like it just came out of the factory. Who knows how many games or battle of the bands or competitions or whatever it's been through. Drums take a beating, compared to a lot of other instruments. We literally hit them, and then like it's made out of wood. If rain gets in that, the rain can get in it. It can soak the shell. It can warp it. There's just a load of things that can like mess with drums. So yeah, I think just compromising with the drums and just trying to make the best out of a bad situation and just figuring out like it may not be what you want the drums to sound like, but it may be what the drums just sound the best as, given what you're doing. And then of course, like if like your heads are going like, one thing to keep in mind is if you're on like a super budget, like any drum head kind of works on quads. I don't necessarily recommend it. But like I've seen even people use like drum set heads on quads before, in like a emergency situation, or like I know at the Springs too for like emergency heads. We never threw away old heads until like the season was over, or if the head was just like destroyed and like broken. Like if we needed an emergency head, it's not exactly like my favorite thing to do, but like let's say I broke a head like right before a competition, we'd grab like an old head and just slap it on. If we didn't have any more new heads, and you can get by like that. I'd say just compromising, being conservative, just making the best out of that situation. That's all I can really say on that.
Yeah, new instructors, never throw away your old heads. I do the same thing, because you never know you're going to need it, and I tell my guys at state, something happens in the stands, bring everything we got, all the new heads, old heads, because you never know. You're going to need whatever at whatever time.
Right.
That
actually happened my senior year of high school. We had the Highland Springs drumline competition we hosted at our school, and that was like a really big year. Like there were so many groups there. It was like 7 high school drum lines, 7 dance lines, and then like a load of college drum lines. I know MD performed there, and one of the tenors broke their high spock head, and so they borrowed one of our old high spock heads. And, I was excited. They were like, hey, James, like my percussion instructor came up to me. He's like, hey, James, do we have like an old tenor head, like give the MD? And of course I'm looking to go there like the next year. I'm like, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, you just got to make the best out of any situation you can when it comes to like heads breaking or equipment breaking.
That's it. Rick?
Yeah. So James, you have pretty much laid it out there, whether it's the quads, quints, the septeps that you guys have at this point, the tuning process would be the same for them all, whether you have 4, 5, or 6 drums at this point. So I really appreciate you coming on and just sharing with us, sharing with our viewers, sharing with the potential percussion instructors, potential band instructors as well. Some basic tuning maintenance purposes, because there again, how you guys tune is going to be, you're tuning for a specific purpose. It's not going to be the same sound all across, but the maintenance is still going to be the same across the board, no matter where you're at. And I think you really hit on some good things. I personally took a lot from this. There's been a lot of changes. I'm glad changes for the good, because, the challenges that Elijah and myself had when we were coming up, folks would just jump on, hey, tune them up. Let's get to work. We got to go, no methodology behind tuning per se, but I'm thankful that you came on, and we want to say thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks for having me out. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Cool. So, we have come to an end. HBCU.
Well, hold on, E. Hold on. So, James, before we go, and I'm sure you've seen some of our episodes before we go and everything, we always ask 2 questions. This is the bonus question, and we turn it over to you. So before we go, with any HBCU drumline, right, that's out there right now, if you had your chance to get your hands on any HBCU drumline for 30 days, who would it be and why? And you had free reign.
Would it be like would it be from like a teaching perspective or just like observing? Because I think there's like a different.
You teaching, writing music, instructing, doing what you do.
Any HBCU drumline, if you had to get your hands on any HBCU drumline, who would it be and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there are so many that I love to watch. As far as teaching, being a quad player, I'm gonna want to go to a school for sure that like I think my style of teaching and my approach to quads kind of already melds with what they do. I think one of the distinctive things for HBCU drumlines that I think you don't see as much in other drumline cultures as much anymore is every HBCU drumline has such a distinct sound. Like when a drumline is going down the street or I hear a video, I know who it is. Like the Funk Squad sounds like the Funk Squad. VSU sounds like VSU. Cold Steel sounds like Cold Steel. Vice versa. Whoever you throw in that conversation. Just offhand, I think either Central or Bethune. Just thinking offhands from like a quad perspective. I'd almost say like SCSU, but I haven't like seen as much of them like in like the last 10 years. I'd probably need to go catch up on that. But yeah, I'd say either like Central or Bethune. Like there's things I see in them where like I feel like I could go there and just make like a few small changes and just like watch like tenor excellence fly. And they already have like a lot of great things going on, I just think that my like interpretation of what tenor playing should be kind of melts the best with that. I think Central's had a lot of great things going on in the last few years. Obviously, Norfolk alumnus was teaching them for a while, Dante Chambers. So, there's kind of like a consistency, I think, in the approach there too. And like Bethune, obviously, when I think of them, I think of the snare line, the like huge snare lines, just like the craziness there. I think it would be really cool. Like when I see their tenors, like I see like kind of that. I could see like a similar vibe of like all these choppy snares and then like just the tenors keeping up with them and just playing them on these crazy rounds. So I'd say either Central or Bethune.
Good choices. Thanks.
I can see that. You doing some damage. Not saying the Quentin line at Bethune is not playing anything, but I can see you add on to what they do.
Yeah, for sure.
But another thing that we always do, at the end, we always ask, I guess, where the sticks in the pad. Show us something, or show the viewers something.
Oh, show something.
Freestyle.
And by the way, when you did get up, I see that you did have the septet practice pads back there.
Uh-oh. I didn't see that.
I see him.
Yeah.
Good eye.
When you got up,
I
said, there they
are. I actually don't use that one. Funny enough, right now.
I got
this one on me right now.
Oh my goodness.
He got two.
This is the OG practice pad. I got this when I was like 14 years old. So this one has seen like 90% of my practice time on quads, like ever. I actually have a ProLogix pad as well, but I'm lending it out to a friend right now.
So you got three.
Yeah, 3. Although I think I might be selling that one soon. So
I'm gonna go on mute so it doesn't pick anything up. Hopefully it plays.
Yeah, me too. I'm going on mute also.
Sure. I'll play. Honestly, I wasn't prepared to play anything. I'll play the solo that we played at the Norfolk Bowl, but the one with the drums on. The first one.
Actually, I was just gonna say you don't need to have anything prepared, man. Just do you.
Man, I'm not like necessarily the freestyle. I mean, I could kind of freestyle. If you ask on that tenor line though, Sean Parker can freestyle. He's another dude who marched on that tenor line. But I'll play a few things. Oh, man. This pad has like no more rebound anymore because I've split the wood. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, this is being held together by like a bunch of tape, so that drum just has like no more rebound anymore. I can play like one more thing maybe.
Hey man, take us away. Sounds good to me.
Man, I got cold hands right now.
No, but James, like I said, man, we just really appreciate you coming on and giving the knowledge for our viewers. I know I did take my notes. I know we are here to help everybody who's into percussion. For HBCU Drumline Talk, we appreciate you coming on and everything. This was just truly a treat, and spread the word, man. We'll talk and keep up with Elijah.
Yeah, once again, I want to thank James Swiger, for taking time on this day, to come on HBCU Drumline Talk. But first, before I leave, James, that Quint solo, or Six Tuplets solo that y'all guys did with A&T, it's worldwide, but it was very very well, material-wise, good, sounding, everybody's together. And, come from Virginia State, as an instructor, I liked it, appreciated it for drumming as a whole. But very good job. I'm sure you had a lot to do with that, but, very good job in everything you're doing. But once again, thank you for coming on, taking your time, time out your day to come on. But once again, we're coming to an end, and this is a special episode about tuning for quints, quads, trips, whatever you want to call it. Please follow us, HBCU Drumline Talk, Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud. Give us a like, share with your friends, family, and we're out. Everybody be safe.